The morning sun cast long shadows across the gardens of Adelaide Cottage as Prince William made his way up the familiar stone steps. He had returned earlier than expected from his royal duties in Wales, eager to surprise Kate and the children. The house seemed unusually quiet for a Saturday morning, and William noticed that Kate's car was still in the driveway, though the children's bicycles were missing from their usual spot by the garden shed. William fumbled with his keys at the front door, smiling to himself as he imagined Kate's surprise when he walked through the door. They had been married for over a decade now, but he still felt that flutter of excitement when coming home to her. The past few months had been particularly challenging, with increased royal responsibilities and the children growing older, requiring more attention and guidance. As he turned the key and pushed open the heavy wooden door, William called out cheerfully, "Kate, I'm home early." His voice echoed through the entrance hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and polished floors. The silence that greeted him was unexpected. Usually the house buzzed with activity on weekends, filled with the sounds of children playing, Kate moving about the kitchen, or music playing softly in the background. William set down his overnight bag and removed his coat, hanging it carefully on the antique coat stand that had been a wedding gift from his grandmother. He paused for a moment, listening intently. That's when he heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from the direction of the sitting room. It was barely audible, but after years of marriage, he recognized it immediately. Kate was crying. His heart immediately began to race. In all their years together, William had rarely seen Kate cry. She was incredibly strong, always composed even during the most difficult royal engagements or family challenges. She had weathered media storms, public scrutiny, and the pressures of royal life with remarkable grace. For her to be crying alone in their home meant something was seriously wrong. William walked quietly toward the sitting room, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs that lined the hallway. As he approached the doorway, he could hear Kate more clearly now. She was trying to muffle her sobs, probably using a tissue or perhaps burying her face in one of the throw pillows from their sofa. The sound was heartbreaking, raw and vulnerable in a way that made William's chest tighten with concern. He paused at the doorway, uncertain whether to announce his presence or quietly observe to understand what had upset his wife so deeply. Through the partially opened door, he could see Kate sitting on their favorite sofa, the one they had chosen together when they first moved into the cottage. She was hunched over slightly, her shoulders shaking with each silent sob. On the coffee table in front of her, William noticed several items scattered about, what appeared to be letters or documents, some photographs, and Kate's laptop was open. Her phone was face down beside her, and William could see that the screen was lit up, suggesting she had recently received a call or message. William's mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened to her family? Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had been in good health when he last saw them. Could it be something involving the children? But their bicycles were gone, which suggested they were out playing, probably with friends in the neighborhood as they often did on weekend mornings. Perhaps it was something related to their royal duties. Kate had been working on several important charitable initiatives lately, and William knew how personally she took any setbacks or criticisms related to her work. She poured her heart into everything she did, whether it was her early childhood development programs or her photography projects. As William stood there, trying to decide how best to approach the situation, Kate suddenly looked up. Their eyes met across the room, and William saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. It wasn't just sadness or disappointment. There was a deep hurt there, mixed with what appeared to be shock and disbelief. Kate quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and attempted to compose herself, but it was too late. William had already seen the depth of her distress. She tried to smile at him, that automatic response that had been trained into her through years of public appearances, but the smile didn't reach her eyes and only served to highlight how upset she truly was. "William," she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying, "I didn't expect you back so soon." William immediately crossed the room and sat down beside her on the sofa, gathering her into his arms without hesitation. Kate didn't resist, instead melting into his embrace and allowing herself to cry freely against his chest. William could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself as if she were trying to contain something enormous and overwhelming. "What's happened, darling?" William asked gently, stroking her hair with one hand while holding her close with the other. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Just tell me what's wrong." Kate pulled back slightly to look at him, and William could see that her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She had been at this for some time before he arrived. She gestured weakly toward the items on the coffee table, but seemed unable to find the words to explain what had caused such distress. William looked more closely at the table and realized that among the papers were several printed emails and what appeared to be photographs. His stomach began to sink as he wondered what kind of information could have affected Kate so profoundly. In their world, bad news often came in the form of media revelations, family scandals, or threats to their security and privacy. Kate took a shaky breath and finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "William, there's something I need to show you. Something that changes everything we thought we knew." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and the promise of revelations that would alter their understanding of their world forever. William felt his heart pounding as Kate reached for the documents on the coffee table with trembling hands. She picked up a thick manila envelope that appeared to have been recently opened, the edges slightly torn from what looked like hasty handling. William could see that it bore an official-looking seal and was addressed to HRH, the Duchess of Cambridge, in formal script. "This arrived by special courier this morning," Kate began, her voice still unsteady. "About an hour after you left for your engagement in Wales. I almost didn't open it immediately because I thought it was just another official invitation or ceremonial request." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I wish I hadn't opened it at all." Kate handed William the envelope, and he could see that it came from a law firm in London, one that he didn't recognize, which was unusual given their family's extensive legal connections. The letterhead read, "Pemberton, Davies and Associates," and the address was in an exclusive area of the city known for handling sensitive, high-profile cases. "Read the letter first," Kate said quietly, pointing to a multi-page document that was paper-clipped together. "But prepare yourself, William. This isn't just about us. It's about your family, about everything we've been told about your mother's death." William's hands grew cold as he unfolded the letter. The formal language of legal correspondence filled the pages, but certain phrases jumped out at him immediately. Previously undisclosed evidence, witness testimony suppressed, circumstances surrounding the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, and photographic evidence obtained through private investigation. As William read further, the letter explained that a former security operative who had worked in France during the late 1990s was now terminally ill and had decided to come forward with information he had kept secret for over 2 decades. The man, whose identity was protected by the law firm, claimed to have photographic evidence and documentation that suggested the car crash that killed William's mother was not the accident that the world had been told it was. William's hands began to shake as he read the operative's claims. According to the letter, there had been additional vehicles present at the scene that night, vehicles that were never reported to authorities. The operative claimed to have taken photographs that showed these vehicles and their occupants, images that had never been shared with any official investigation. "Kate," William whispered, looking up at his wife with wide eyes, "this can't be real." There were multiple investigations. The inquest concluded that it was a tragic accident caused by the pursuing paparazzi and Henri Paul's intoxication. How could there be evidence that was never examined? Kate's expression was a mixture of sympathy and anguish. "Keep reading, darling. There's more." William continued through the letter, discovering that the operative claimed to have been working for a private security firm that had contracts with various government agencies. On the night of Diana's death, he had been conducting surveillance on an unrelated matter when he witnessed the events in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. According to his account, he saw what appeared to be a coordinated operation involving multiple vehicles that deliberately caused the crash. The letter went on to explain that the operative had initially remained silent out of fear for his own safety and the safety of his family. However, facing a terminal diagnosis and wanting to clear his conscience, he had decided to make this information available to Diana's sons before his death. William set the letter down with shaking hands and looked at Kate, who was watching him with deep concern. "Have you looked at the photographs?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Kate nodded slowly and reached for a sealed envelope that had been enclosed with the letter. "I couldn't help myself. I had to see what this man was claiming to have. Her voice broke slightly as she continued. William, if these images are authentic, they show something completely different from what we've always been told. With great reluctance, William opened the envelope and found himself looking at a series of black and white photographs that appeared to have been taken with a telephoto lens from a considerable distance. The images were grainy but clear enough to make out the entrance to the Pont de l'Alma tunnel and several vehicles in the vicinity. What was most disturbing was that the timestamps on the photographs showed they were taken both before and after the crash. In one image, William could clearly see what appeared to be two dark sedans positioned strategically near the tunnel entrance. In another, taken after the crash, these same vehicles appeared to be leaving the scene in an organized fashion. Most shocking of all was a photograph that seemed to show occupants of one of the vehicles observing the crash site with what appeared to be professional surveillance equipment. My God, William whispered, staring at the images. If this is real, it means everything we've been told about that night is a lie. Kate moved closer to him on the sofa, placing a comforting hand on his arm. There's something else, William. The law firm included a note saying that this operative isn't the only person who has come forward. Apparently, there are others who were involved in various capacities that night, and they're all reaching the same conclusion in their later years, that what happened to your mother was not an accident. William felt as though the room was spinning around him. For over 25 years, he had carried the grief of losing his mother in what he had been told was a senseless accident. The official investigations had concluded that Diana, Dodi Al-Fayed, and Henri Paul had died as a result of reckless paparazzi pursuit and the driver's intoxication. While there had always been conspiracy theories surrounding the crash, William had dismissed them as the desperate attempts of people who couldn't accept that sometimes tragic accidents simply happen. Now, holding what appeared to be evidence that challenged everything he had believed, William felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. There was anger at the possibility that he had been lied to for so many years. There was grief, reopening wounds that he thought had healed, and there was a terrible uncertainty about what this might mean for his family, for the monarchy, and for the memory of his mother. Kate, he said finally, his voice barely audible. If this is true, it means someone killed my mother deliberately. It means someone has been covering it up for over 2 decades. It means that Harry and I have been living with a lie our entire adult lives. Kate squeezed his arm gently. I know, darling. That's why I've been crying. I can't imagine how you're going to process this or what we're going to do with this information, but we have to consider the possibility that it's authentic. William sat in stunned silence for several long minutes. The photographs spread across the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture he had never wanted to see. Kate remained beside him, occasionally reaching out to touch his hand or shoulder, providing what comfort she could while respecting his need to process this earth-shattering information. Finally, William spoke, his voice hollow and distant. Do you remember what I told you about the last conversation I had with her? He didn't need to explain who her was. Diana's presence had always been felt in their relationship, not as a burden, but as a guiding spirit that Kate had embraced rather than resented. Kate nodded. She knew the story well. William had shared with her how his mother had called him and Harry while they were staying with their father at Balmoral. The boys had been eager to continue playing outside and had kept the conversation shorter than usual. It was a source of guilt that William had carried for years, the knowledge that his last words to his mother had been hurried. Distracted, she sounded worried that day, William continued, his eyes fixed on one particular photograph that showed the mysterious vehicles, not just sad about the media attention or upset about the paparazzi. She sounded genuinely frightened about something. At the time, Harry and I thought it was just because of all the pressure she was under from the press coverage of her relationship with Dodi. William picked up the photograph and studied it more closely. But what if it wasn't just the paparazzi she was afraid of? What if she knew something, suspected something, and that's what made her a target? Kate felt a chill run down her spine. She had always admired Diana from afar, even as a young girl watching the royal wedding on television. Later, when she began dating William, she had studied everything she could about Diana. Not just her public persona, but her private struggles, her humanitarian work, and the circumstances of her death. Kate had wanted to understand the woman who had shaped the man she loved. William, Kate said carefully, there's something else in the envelope. Something I didn't show you yet because I wasn't sure how to handle it." She reached for a smaller sealed envelope that had been tucked behind the photographs. This one was marked, "Personal Effects," previously undisclosed, in the same official handwriting as the rest of the correspondence. William's hands trembled slightly as he opened this final envelope. Inside, he found photocopies of what appeared to be pages from a small notebook, written in his mother's distinctive handwriting. The writing was hurried, almost frantic, and the dates on the pages were from the final weeks of Diana's life. The first page made William's blood run cold. "I know they're watching me. Not just the photographers anymore, this is something different. The man in the gray suit has been following me for 3 days now. He's not press. His car has government plates." William's voice caught in his throat as he read aloud to Kate. The entries continued, each one more disturbing than the last. Diana wrote about feeling paranoid, but being unable to shake the feeling that her phone calls were being monitored. She mentioned strange occurrences, her security systems at Kensington Palace malfunctioning, finding evidence that someone had been in her private apartments when she was away, receiving anonymous phone calls where the caller would hang up immediately. One entry, dated just 5 days before her death, was particularly chilling. "Spoke to Mohammed today. He's worried too. Says his security people are seeing the same things I am. We're both being watched, but why? What do they think we're going to do? All we want is to be left alone to live our lives." Another entry from 3 days before the crash read, "Charles called. Conversation felt strange, formal. He asked specific questions about my travel plans, wanted to know exactly when I would be returning from Paris. Why would he need to know the precise details? He's never cared about my schedule before." William had to stop reading. The implications of what his mother had written were overwhelming. If authentic, these diary entries suggested that Diana had been under some form of surveillance in her final days, and that she had been aware of it. More disturbing still was the suggestion that even members of the royal family might have been involved in monitoring her movements. "Kate," William said, his voice barely a whisper, "if my mother suspected she was in danger, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she reach out for help?" Kate had been wondering the same thing. Maybe she did, William. Maybe she tried to get help and was told there was nothing to worry about. Or maybe she was afraid that the very people she would normally turn to for protection were the ones she needed protection from. The thought hung in the air between them like a dark cloud. William stood up abruptly and began pacing the length of the sitting room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Kate recognized as his way of dealing with extreme stress. She had seen him do this during their most difficult moments, when they were deciding whether to take legal action against newspapers that invaded their privacy, when they were dealing with particularly vicious rumors about their marriage, when the pressures of royal life seemed overwhelming. "This changes everything." "Kate," William said, stopping his pacing to face her. "If this is real, it means someone orchestrated my mother's death. It means someone has been covering it up for over 20 years. It means that every time Harry and I have spoken publicly about accepting that her death was a tragic accident, we've been perpetuating a lie." Kate rose from the sofa and went to her husband, placing her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look directly at her. "William, listen to me. We don't know yet if any of this is real. These could be elaborate forgeries. The photographs could be manipulated. The diary entries could be faked. Before we let this destroy us, we need to have everything authenticated by experts." William nodded, but Kate could see in his eyes that he was already convinced of the material's authenticity. There was something about the handwriting, about the specific details mentioned in the diary entries, about the way his mother's voice came through in the writing that rang true to him. "But what if it is real?" William asked. "What do we do then? How do we handle something like this? Do we go public? Do we demand new investigations? Do we tell the children that their grandmother might have been murdered?" The mention of their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, brought a fresh wave of emotion to both of them. How do you explain to children that their beloved grandmother, whom they had learned about through stories and photographs, might have been the victim of a conspiracy rather than a tragic accident? "And what about Harry?" William continued, his voice growing more agitated. "How do I tell my brother that everything we've believed about the most traumatic event of our lives might be a lie? How do I explain that while we've been trying to honor our mother's memory and carry on her work, someone who was responsible for her death might still be alive, might still be in positions of power. Kate felt the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. This wasn't just a personal matter. It was something that could shake the foundations of the monarchy, of the British government, of everything the public believed about one of the most scrutinized events in modern history. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the sitting room as William and Kate continued to grapple with the implications of what they had discovered. Kate had made tea, though neither of them had touched their cups, both too consumed by the weight of the decision before them to think about such mundane things. William had spent the better part of an hour on the phone with his private secretary, though he had been careful not to reveal the specific nature of what they had received. He had simply requested that their weekend schedule be cleared and that they be given complete privacy at Adelaide Cottage, with security instructed to allow no visitors without prior authorization. Now, sitting across from each other at their kitchen table with the document spread between them once again, they faced the most difficult conversation of their marriage. The cheerful sounds of children playing in the distance, their own children having returned from their morning adventures, provided a stark contrast to the gravity of their discussion. "I keep thinking about what this would mean for them," William said, glancing toward the window where they could see George and Charlotte playing football in the garden, while Louis attempted to join in with his shorter legs and determined spirit. "They have such a pure understanding of their grandmother right now. She's this almost mythical figure to them, the people's princess who died too young but left behind a legacy of love and service." Kate followed his gaze to their children. "How do we preserve that innocence while also seeking justice if this is true? How do we protect them from the media storm that would inevitably follow if we make this public?" William picked up one of Diana's diary entries again, rereading a passage that had particularly struck him. "I worry most about my boys. What kind of world am I leaving them? Will they be safe? Will they be free to choose their own paths, or will they always be prisoners of this institution?" "She was worried about us even then," William murmured. "Even when she was frightened for her own safety, she was thinking about Harry and me. And now I have to decide whether pursuing the truth about her death will put my own children at risk." The thought was agonizing. William had grown up under intense media scrutiny, but nothing compared to what his children would face if he went public with allegations that his mother had been murdered in a conspiracy involving powerful people. The tabloids would be relentless. Every aspect of their family's life would be dissected and analyzed. The children would lose what little privacy and normalcy they had managed to maintain. Kate reached across the table and took William's hand. "There's another consideration, darling. What if we're not the only ones who have received this information? What if this law firm has also contacted Harry? What if they're sending these materials to journalists or other parties?" William hadn't considered this possibility, but it made sense. If the dying operative was truly trying to clear his conscience, he wouldn't necessarily limit his revelations to the immediate family. The thought that Harry might be receiving similar materials at this very moment, possibly without Kate there to support him through the initial shock, made William's stomach churn. "I need to call Harry," William said, standing up quickly. If he's received this information too, he shouldn't be dealing with it alone. But as William reached for his phone, it began ringing. The caller ID showed Harry's name, and William felt a mixture of relief and dread. His brother was calling, which likely meant he had indeed received his own envelope. "Harry?" William answered immediately. "William?" Harry's voice was strained, different from his usual casual tone when calling his brother. "Are you at home? Are you alone with Kate?"
"Yes, we're here."
"Harry, have you received a package from a law firm in London?" "Yes, about 2 hours ago." Harry's voice was tight with emotion. "William, I don't know what to do with this. Megan's in California with the children, and I'm sitting here looking at these photographs, and I feel like my entire world has been turned upside down." William felt a surge of protectiveness toward his younger brother. Despite the distance that had grown between them in recent years, despite the tensions that had arisen from Harry's departure from royal duties and his public criticisms of the family, this transcended all of that. This was about their mother, about the trauma they had shared and carried together since they were children. "Harry, listen to me," William said, his voice steady despite his own turmoil.
"Kate and I have been going through the same materials."
"I know how overwhelming this is. Do you want to come here? We can go through this together." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. William could hear Harry breathing, could almost feel his brother's internal struggle. Their relationship had been complicated in recent years. With Harry's marriage to Meghan, his decision to step back from royal duties, and his subsequent interviews and memoir that had revealed private family conversations and conflicts. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Harry said finally. "Given everything that's happened between Meghan and the family, I'm not sure we can handle both this and our own issues at the same time." Kate, who had been listening to William's side of the conversation, gently took the phone from her husband. "Harry, it's Kate. I know things have been difficult, but this is bigger than any disagreements we've had. Your brother needs you right now, and I think you need him too. Whatever our differences, we all love Diana, and we all want the truth about what happened to her." Another long pause, and then Harry's voice, softer now. "Kate, what if this is real? What if our mother really was murdered? What do we do with that knowledge? How do we live with it?" Kate looked at William, seeing the pain and uncertainty in his eyes mirrored in her own feelings. "I don't know, Harry, but I think we have to face it together, as a family." After some discussion, Harry agreed to take the next flight to London. He would come to Adelaide Cottage that evening, after the children were in bed, and they would review all the materials together. William and Kate spent the rest of the afternoon trying to maintain normalcy for their children, playing in the garden, helping with homework, and sharing dinner together as they always did on weekend evenings. But underneath their practiced smiles and engaged parenting, both William and Kate felt the weight of the secret they were now carrying. Every time they looked at their children, at George, who was becoming so much like his father, at Charlotte, who had Diana's eyes and fearless spirit, at Louis, with his infectious laughter and boundless energy, they wondered what kind of world they were protecting them from, and what kind of future they might be creating for them. As they tucked the children into bed that evening, William found himself holding each of them a little longer than usual, kissing their foreheads with extra tenderness. Charlotte, always perceptive, looked up at him with curious eyes. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" she asked in that direct way children have of cutting straight to the heart of things. William managed to smile, though Kate could see the effort it required. "Not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking about how much I love you and your brothers." Charlotte seemed satisfied with this answer and snuggled down into her covers. But as William and Kate left her room, Kate saw her husband pause in the hallway, his hand on the doorframe, as if steadying himself for what was to come. In a few hours, Harry would arrive, and they would have to face together the possibility that everything they thought they knew about their mother's death was a lie. They would have to decide whether to pursue a truth that might destroy their family's privacy forever, or to remain silent and carry the burden of this knowledge alone. Either choice would change their lives irrevocably. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 o'clock that evening, just as William and Kate had finished ensuring the children were settled for the night. William opened the door to find Harry standing on the doorstep, looking older and more worn than he had seemed during their last public appearance together. Harry carried a leather document case, and his usually confident demeanor had been replaced by something more fragile and uncertain. The two brothers looked at each other for a long moment without speaking. Despite all the tension and disagreements that had divided them in recent years, despite the harsh words that had been exchanged both privately and publicly, this moment stripped away all of that complexity. They were simply two sons who had lost their mother far too young, and were now facing the possibility that her death had been even more tragic than they had ever imagined. "Harry," William said softly, and stepped forward to embrace his brother. Harry didn't hesitate, dropping his document case and returning the embrace with an intensity that spoke to years of suppressed emotion and shared grief. Kate watched from the hallway, tears forming in her eyes as she witnessed this reunion. She had always hoped that someday the brothers would find their way back to each other, that the love that had sustained them through their childhood trauma would eventually overcome the hurt and misunderstandings that had divided them as adults. "Come in," William said, stepping back and picking up Harry's case. "Kate has made coffee and we have everything laid out in the study." As they walked through the house, Harry looked around at the familiar surroundings of Adelaide Cottage. "It feels strange being back here," he said quietly. "Good strange, though. I'd forgotten how peaceful it is." Kate led them to William's private study, a room that had always been his sanctuary within their home. She had arranged the documents on William's large oak desk, organizing them by type: the initial letter from the law firm, the photographs, Diana's diary entries, and several other items they had discovered in their thorough examination of the materials. Harry opened his own document case and began laying out identical materials alongside theirs. "Did you get the forensic analysis report too?" he asked, pulling out a thick folder that William and Kate hadn't seen before. "Forensic analysis?" William asked, leaning forward with interest. Harry nodded grimly. Apparently, the law firm hired independent experts to examine the photographs and documents before sending them to us. They wanted to establish authenticity before making such serious allegations. He opened the folder to reveal detailed technical reports. The photography experts concluded that the images show no signs of digital manipulation and are consistent with the camera equipment and film types available in 1997. Kate felt her heart sink. Part of her had been hoping that expert analysis would reveal the materials to be sophisticated forgeries, freeing them from the terrible burden of deciding what to do with this information. Harry continued. "The handwriting analysis compared samples from the diary entries with known examples of our mother's handwriting from letters, official documents, and personal notes. The expert concluded with 95% certainty that the diary entries were written by the same person who wrote the comparison samples." William sank into his chair, the weight of this confirmation settling heavily on his shoulders. "So it's real," he said, not really asking a question but stating a fact that he was still struggling to accept. "It appears to be," Harry replied, sitting down across from his brother. "But there's more. The law firm included a letter specifically for both of us together. They said they wanted us to receive our individual packages first, to process the information separately. Before we read this final piece." Harry pulled out a sealed envelope marked, "For their Royal Highnesses the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex, to be opened together." With trembling hands, William took the envelope and carefully opened it, unfolding a letter written on the same official letterhead as their individual correspondence. William read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the words. "Your Royal Highnesses, if you are reading this letter together, it means you have both chosen to pursue the truth about your mother's death, rather than dismiss these materials as the work of conspiracy theorists or attention seekers. This gives us hope that justice may finally be served." The letter went on to explain that the dying operative was not acting alone. Over the years, he had been contacted by others who had been present in various capacities on the night of Diana's death. Additional security personnel, government officials, and even members of the media who had been pressured to suppress certain information in their reporting. "A group of us have been meeting quietly for several years," the letter continued, "sharing our individual pieces of the puzzle. What we have discovered is that the crash that killed your mother was indeed orchestrated, but not by any single person or organization. Instead, it appears to have been the result of multiple parties with different motivations who found their interests aligned in removing Princess Diana from public life permanently." Harry stopped reading and looked up at William. "Multiple parties? What does that mean?" William took the letter and continued reading. The law firm explained that their investigation had uncovered evidence suggesting involvement from several sources. Elements within the British intelligence services who were concerned about Diana's growing political influence and her criticisms of government policies, particularly regarding landmines. Members of the establishment who feared that Diana's relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed might lead to further embarrassment for the royal family. And even certain business interests who were concerned about Diana's humanitarian work, affecting their international operations. "The most disturbing aspect of our findings," the letter continued, "is that the operation appears to have had at least tacit approval from individuals within the highest levels of government and possibly the royal family itself." Kate gasped audibly at this revelation. The suggestion that members of William and Harry's own family might have been involved in Diana's death was almost too horrible to contemplate. Harry's face had gone pale. "William, if this is true, it means that people we've known our entire lives, people who comforted us after her death, people who spoke at her funeral about what a wonderful mother and humanitarian she was, some of them might have been involved in killing her." William felt physically sick. The letter went on to explain that the group of former operatives and officials had been working to compile all their evidence into a comprehensive case that could be presented to international authorities, possibly through the European Court of Human Rights or other bodies that might be less susceptible to British political pressure than domestic courts. They're asking for our permission, William realized, reading the final paragraphs of the letter. They want to know if we support their efforts to go public with this information. They're saying that without our backing, they don't have the credibility or platform to make these allegations stick. The letter concluded with a request for a meeting within the next week, either in London or at a location of the brothers' choosing. The group was prepared to present their complete evidence and discuss the various options for moving forward, including the potential consequences of each course of action. Harry leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that mirrored his brother's earlier stress response. They're putting the decision on us, William. They're making us choose between letting our mother's murderers continue living their lives unpunished, or potentially destroying everything we've built for our own families. Kate, who had been quiet throughout much of this revelation, finally spoke. There's something else to consider. If we don't support their efforts to go public, what's to stop them from proceeding anyway? And if they do, and the media discovers that we were approached first and chose to remain silent, how does that look? Do we appear to be complicit in a cover-up? William hadn't considered this angle, but Kate was right. In today's media environment, their response to these allegations would become part of the story itself. If they appeared to be suppressing information about Diana's death, public opinion could turn against them dramatically. And what about Meghan and the children? Harry asked suddenly. If we do this, if we go public with murder allegations against powerful people, how do we protect our families? You saw what the media did to Meghan just for marrying me. Imagine what they'll do if we're accusing members of the establishment of conspiracy and murder. William looked at his brother with new understanding. Harry's decision to move his family to California, his criticism of the media and the institution, his fierce protection of Meghan and their children, it all made more sense now in the context of their shared trauma and Harry's belief that the same forces that had hurt their mother might target his wife and children. Harry, William said slowly, is this part of why you left? Not just the media pressure on Meghan, but fear that the same people who might have killed our mother could threaten your family. Harry was quiet for a long moment before answering. I've always had questions about the official story of her death. William, always. But I could never prove anything. And every time I tried to investigate privately, I was told to leave it alone, that reopening old wounds would only cause more pain for everyone. He paused, his voice becoming more emotional. When I met Meghan, when I saw how the same media tactics that had been used against our mother were being deployed against my wife, I became terrified that history was repeating itself. Kate felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched the two brothers, both of whom had been shaped so profoundly by their mother's death and their different ways of coping with that loss. William had chosen to work within the system, to honor Diana's memory through official charitable work and by fulfilling his royal duties. Harry had chosen to break free from the constraints that he believed had contributed to their mother's death. Maybe that's why this information is coming to us now, Kate said softly. Maybe it's not coincidence that this is happening when you two have been separated by your different approaches to dealing with the past. Maybe this is an opportunity to find a way forward together. William looked at his wife with gratitude for her insight, then turned to his brother. Harry, I know we've said things to each other that have been hurtful. I know there are wounds between us that haven't healed. But this is bigger than our personal disagreements. This is about our mother, about justice, about the truth. Harry nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I've missed you, William. I've missed having my brother to talk to about the things that only we understand, and I've especially missed talking to you about her, about our memories of her, about how to honor her legacy. Then let's figure this out together, William said, reaching across the desk to clasp his brother's hand. Whatever we decide, whether we support these people in going public or whether we find another way to seek justice, let's decide it as brothers, as Diana's sons. Kate watched as the two men she cared about most in the world clasped hands across the desk, covered with evidence that could change everything they thought they knew about their family, their country, and their mother's death. In this moment, the divisions that had separated them seemed less important than the bond that had always united them. We need to be smart about this, Harry said, his voice gaining strength. If we're going to do this, we need to control the narrative from the beginning. We need legal advice, media strategy, security arrangements for our families, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that some very powerful people are going to try to stop us. William squeezed his brother's hand before releasing it. Then we'd better start planning. 3 weeks later, William stood at the window of a private conference room in a discreet London hotel, watching the city below as it went about its daily business, unaware that a decision was about to be made that could reshape British history. Behind him, Harry sat at a polished mahogany table alongside their carefully chosen legal team, a group of international human rights lawyers who specialized in cases involving government accountability and institutional corruption. The week since that emotional evening at Adelaide Cottage had been a whirlwind of secret meetings, security assessments, and careful planning. True to their word, the brothers had decided to face this challenge together, but they had also insisted on thoroughly vetting every piece of evidence before making any public commitments. Kate had been instrumental in the process, using her background in art history and her eye for detail to help coordinate the authentication efforts. She had also been the one to suggest bringing in Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned forensic document examiner from Oxford who had worked on several high-profile historical investigations. Dr. Mitchell's analysis had confirmed what the law firm's experts had concluded. The materials appeared to be authentic. The group of former operatives had proven to be more credible than William and Harry had initially dared to hope. Led by James Crawford, a former MI6 operative who was indeed terminally ill with pancreatic cancer, the group included 2 former Metropolitan Police officers, a retired Ministry of Defense official, and most surprisingly, a former private secretary to the Queen who had witnessed several conversations about Diana in the months before her death. The evidence is overwhelming. Dr. Mitchell had told them during one of their preliminary meetings. Not only are the documents authentic, but they paint a picture of coordination and planning that extends far beyond what any individual actor could have accomplished alone. Now, as William turned from the window to face the assembled group, he felt the weight of 26 years of grief, anger, and unanswered questions settling on his shoulders. Harry caught his eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of support and solidarity that reminded William of how they had stood together at their mother's funeral all those years ago. James Crawford, looking frail but determined despite his illness, opened a thick folder containing what he called the complete picture. Over the past month, his group had compiled not just the evidence they had shared initially, but additional materials that had come to light once word had spread quietly through certain circles that an investigation was underway. "Your Royal Highnesses," Crawford began, his voice weak but clear, "what we are about to share with you represents the combined knowledge of 17 individuals who were present in various capacities during the events surrounding your mother's death. Some were directly involved in the operation, others witnessed the aftermath and cover-up. All of us have carried this burden for over 2 decades. Crawford explained that the conspiracy had been more extensive than even their initial materials had suggested. The plan to eliminate Diana had been discussed at the highest levels of government for months before it was carried out, driven by a combination of factors that made her increasingly seen as a threat to established interests. Your mother's relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed was the final catalyst, Crawford continued. Not because of racial prejudice, though that played a part, but because Mohammed Al-Fayed had been conducting his own investigation into corruption within British business and political circles. There was genuine fear that Diana's association with the family would give her access to information that could bring down several prominent figures. William felt his jaw clench as Crawford described how the operation had been planned with multiple contingencies, designed to look like an accident while ensuring that Diana could not survive to expose what she had learned about various scandals involving arms dealing, financial corruption, and abuse of power. Harry, who had been taking notes throughout the presentation, looked up sharply. "Are you saying our mother was targeted not just because she was an inconvenience to the royal family, but because she had become a threat to criminal activities?" Crawford nodded grimly. Princess Diana had become what intelligence services call a nexus point, someone whose humanitarian work and personal relationships were giving her access to information about multiple sensitive operations. The landmine campaign was just the beginning. She was asking questions about arms sales, about the sources of funding for various conflicts, about the connections between British businesses and human rights abuses around the world. Kate, who had been listening intently while taking her own notes, asked the question that had been troubling her most. If this conspiracy was so extensive, involving so many people in positions of power, how can we possibly expect to achieve justice? Won't these same people simply use their influence to discredit or suppress whatever evidence we present? Crawford's expression was grave as he answered, "That's precisely why we need your support, Your Royal Highness." Without the credibility that comes from Diana's own sons endorsing this investigation, the evidence can be dismissed as the fantasies of disgruntled former employees or conspiracy theorists. But with your backing, the international community will be forced to take these allegations seriously. One of the lawyers, Maria Santos, a Brazilian attorney who had successfully prosecuted government officials for human rights violations in several countries, leaned forward. "We've been in preliminary discussions with the International Criminal Court, the European Court of Human Rights, and several international human rights organizations. There is significant interest in pursuing this case, but only if we can demonstrate that the family members most affected by these crimes support the investigation." William exchanged a long look with Harry before speaking. "We understand the implications of what you're asking us to do. We understand that this will likely destroy any privacy our families have left, that it will subject our children to intense scrutiny, that it may even put us in physical danger from people who have already demonstrated their willingness to kill, to protect their secrets." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "But we also understand that our mother died fighting for justice and truth. She spent her life speaking for people who couldn't speak for themselves, challenging institutions and individuals who abused their power. If we remain silent about her murder, we become complicit in the very corruption she died opposing." Harry nodded in agreement. "We've decided to support your efforts to bring this evidence to international authorities," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "But we have conditions." Crawford leaned forward attentively as Harry outlined the terms they had developed with their legal team. "First, the investigation must be conducted through international bodies to minimize the risk of British political interference. Second, the safety and privacy of their children must be the paramount concern in any media strategy. Third, they wanted the complete evidence made public simultaneously across multiple platforms to prevent any single organization from suppressing or distorting the information. Most importantly, William added, we want this to be about more than just our mother's death. We want the investigation to expose the broader patterns of corruption and abuse of power that made her murder possible. If we're going to put our families through this ordeal, it needs to serve a larger purpose." Kate watched her husband as he spoke, seeing in him the same sense of duty and determination that had drawn her to him years ago, but now tempered by a deep understanding of the costs of seeking justice. She knew that this decision would change their lives forever, that their children would grow up in a world where their grandmother's death was the subject of international legal proceedings and media coverage. But she also knew that William and Harry were making the only choice they could live with. They had spent their adult lives trying to honor Diana's memory through their charitable work and public service. Now they had the opportunity to honor her memory by ensuring that those responsible for her death finally faced justice. Crawford, despite his illness, seemed energized by their decision. "Thank you, Your Royal Highnesses. We will begin filing the formal complaints and evidence packages with international authorities within the next week. We estimate that it will take several months for the various legal processes to begin, during which time we will continue gathering additional evidence and witness testimony." As the meeting concluded and the various participants began gathering their materials, William found himself thinking about his children, who were at that moment safely at school, unaware that their father was about to set in motion events that would dominate their lives for years to come. But he also thought about his mother, about the young woman who had married into the royal family with such hope and optimism, only to find herself trapped in a system that ultimately saw her as expendable. If there was any chance that pursuing the truth about her death might prevent others from suffering the same fate, then the personal cost was worth paying. Harry approached his brother as the room emptied. "Are you ready for this?" he asked simply. William looked at his brother, seeing in Harry's face the same mixture of determination and apprehension that he felt himself. "I don't think anyone could be ready for something like this," he replied, "but I think we're as prepared as we can be." Kate joined them, placing a supportive hand on each of their arms. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together," she said. "As a family." As they left the hotel through a discreet back entrance, William felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. For the first time since receiving that devastating envelope 3 weeks ago, he felt like they were moving toward something positive rather than simply reacting to shocking revelations. They were finally going to seek justice for Diana, and they were going to do it together.